all know people who we would describe as being more mature than others. We know some people who perhaps seem vulnerable or easily manipulated, easily led astray, and we might say that these people need to grow up a bit. They could do with being a bit more adult. But this is true of all of us, because of the way our culture works and because of the way we grow up. We all carry a little bit of our child self inside us, and quite unexpectedly, we'll just be wandering through our lives and then suddenly we'll be triggered into our child state and we'll be thinking and feeling and acting the same way as when we were children. Throughout my coaching work, I deal with this a lot. I'm always trying to encourage someone to be their best adult self and have a good relationship with their childhood impulses. But what does any of this mean? What does it mean to be an adult? How does any of this happen? Why do we not naturally progress from child into adult fully? How is it that things are triggered, and what does that look like, and what does it feel like? How do we work with all of this stuff? Now, this is an enormous topic, and I'm sure I will come back to this and cover it again, but today I just want to cover the basics. What happens to us when we're little? How does that then stay with us into our adult lives? How does it affect our choices and our potential? How does it affect the amount of control that we have of our lives? What do we do about any of this? If you do this work, and if you fully embrace your adult identity, what does that do for you? What benefits do you get out of that? Is it really worth all the hard work to get there? Of course, I think it is. I think this is one of the most amazing, incredible journeys you can ever take in your lifetimes. And those people who put effort into understanding this whole formula inside themselves and moving further and further in the direction of their fully embodied adult selves, they have more control, they have more access to their potential, there is more consistency in their lives, they're more resilient, they feel more at peace with themselves. All sorts of things become possible if you do this work. I'm a big fan, and today I'm going to be trying to unpack that a bit for you. As ever, if you find this one helpful, then please give it a like. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel and leave me a comment. What do you think about this material? Do you think it's relevant? Do you think it's real? Where are you on your journey in your full maturing and reaching your maximum adult potential? So I sat down a couple of weeks ago and I spoke for well over an hour about this subject, and I thought I had it recorded and good and ready to go, and I was going to go through the editing process and just release it. And then I watched it back and I realized that I was just trying to cover way too much ground. I was trying to kind of sum up everything from developmental psychology, how does the human brain develop in the early stages of life, how do we start learning our early sort of belief structures and emotional responses, how does that then stay with us when we grow up? How is it that we get triggered back into a child state throughout our lives? What can you do about this? What are the established processes that help you work with this? What are the amazing benefits you get out of doing all this really hard work to leave behind your childhood responses and update them with adult ones? So I did all of that, as I say, like talking for over an hour, and I watched it back and just realized that it was a rookie mistake. And what I should have done is make this into a bit of a series. My work is all about delivering practical stuff. So it's either a technique or a tool you can use, or it's a methodology that could spark off thoughts and ideas for you and help you change the direction of your personal development. So I'm trying to do something practical for you. Doing that massive thing was not a good idea. So today I'm just going to talk about the 4 things that I most often say to my clients about adult development, about reaching this ideal state of being a fully embodied adult. But I just want to start by saying, why would you want to do this? Just covering that because it's hard work. Like, this can be the work of somebody's life. It can take years or even decades to fully move yourself, what we call initiate self, into adulthood. So if I'm spelling something out for you that's going to be a long and hard journey, and wherever you are on your journey, whether this is new stuff to you or whether you're beginning to think, how adult am I? Is there work I need to do on this? Or whether you've been committed to this for a long time already, I just want to give you some inspiration and some motivation as to why you would want to do this really hard stuff. Now, if you've read my book, Deep Joy, the first 2/3 of my book are really about unlearning stuff and about developing new skills to take their place. Do you remember when Yoda said, you have to unlearn what you have learned, that is a massive component of personal development. We are pre-programmed throughout our early life and often throughout our whole life with a whole bunch of beliefs and instinctive responses which are handed to us by our culture. That happens through our parents when we're young, it happens through our education, and it happens through our sort of the constant reinforcement that we get throughout our adult lives. And a whole bunch of it is really unhelpful and toxic and stupid. But, well, I think we all kind of know that. Like, I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary there. We all know that we're handed crap by our culture. But actually specifying what those things are and then working out what to do about them can be really hard to kind of get your head around and then make actionable. So that's what my book is kind of about, at least the first 2/3 are about. And then the last third is, once you've got this stuff in place, what do you do with it? How do you live your life based on this new stuff that you've learned and all the ways that you've updated your responses to things? So adulthood is kind of one of the major pinnacles of personal development. It's the freeing of self from early life impulses and needs and drivers. And it opens up a much more exciting kind of life. The reason my book is called Deep Joy is because that is what you finally have access to once you've cleared all the crap out of the way. Once you've got rid of all these cultural conditioning, and once you've done the work to make yourself into a fully realized adult, then you can make a really amazing life, which is not constantly being paralyzed or knocked off track or really vulnerable to certain types of certain words or certain information coming in. You can become consistent and you can choose what was going to make you the happiest in your life. And there's a kind of joy that is only accessible to people who have done this work. I really believe in it. I see it happen in my clients all the time. I have been through it. So ultimately, this is about happiness and satisfaction and joy. That can feel counterintuitive because so much of our culture venerates youth. There is so much information and so many reinforcements from different places that young people have fun, and as you get older, you have less fun, it's more dreary, there's less to look forward to, it all just becomes about responsibility and heaviness and waiting for death. And that is not how I see the world at all. And really, anyone who has properly interrogated that way of looking at the world realizes that it was simply a way to sell you products. It's simply a way to sell you things to make you still feel young, because you remember how much happiness there was at certain times of your youth. But there is a much deeper, richer sort of seam of joy, which is only accessible once you've done this work. So why would you do this? Because you will be happier. I sort of see it that you have to do all of this work just to get to the starting blocks so that you can live the life you were supposed to live. We're getting rid of all the crap and we are equipping you with more skills. And embracing your adulthood and the power and the freedom that comes with that is remarkable. It will allow you to access joy that you never knew was possible. So this is hugely worthwhile stuff. I see people go through it all the time, and I would just encourage you to commit to this and engage with it on a regular basis. With that out of the way, 4 things that I regularly tell my clients. The first 2 are to do with how do you make sense of what happened to you as a child? And then the last 2 are about what do you do with that information as an adult. So the first thing that we're talking about is normalization of what happened to you as a kid because you had no point of comparison. You're born, you start learning at a remarkable rate. We are born kind of prematurely as humans because our brains are massive and a woman's hips are quite narrow. And so that's why we do so much of our development outside of the womb. So a lot of the things, if you think about other mammals who can just they're born, they stand up. They are basically functional within hours of being born. And yet it seems to take us months or years to get to a point where we even come close to what it is to be a fully functioning human. So we are doing a lot of our development at an incredibly accelerated rate. And we're witnessing the world around us as we do that, while we're learning to focus our eyes and learn motor control and all the stuff that a baby has to do early on. We're also taking in subtle stuff around tones of voice, relationships, how much physical contact do people have, how do people seem to treat each other around us. And that becomes the very foundation of our understanding about how to be a human being, how to have relationships, how to relate to yourself. As you grow up further, you will start having more sophisticated observations. So language, you learn how men are supposed to talk, apparently, and how women are supposed to talk, and you'll start getting feedback in response to your behavior. So if you do the right thing and it's the thing that your family do, then you get feedback, well done, and you get some kind of emotional reward. If you do the bad things, then you'll get some kind of emotional punishment. You'll be told that it's wrong and bad and shameful and stuff like that. Whether it's directly or through people's behavior, again, you learn all that stuff as you're growing up, and this stuff becomes the foundation layer to your identity. Now, what tends to happen later in life is that you look back and you realize how crazy it all was. Most of us have crazy families. Maybe it's your first relationships, your first intimate relationships, where you start opening up and saying, what was your childhood like compared to other people's childhood? Or talking to friends, or engaging with your own personal growth, maybe some counselling, or picking up some books. You begin to identify that there was really crazy stuff happening to you when you were a child. You were being taught things that were unhelpful or toxic. Your parents were acting out their own dramas or their own insecurities, and they were kind of passing them on to you. And one of the things that can be quite natural to do at that point is to misunderstand why you were affected by that. But you've got to put yourself in the place of your little squishy infantile self. Okay, you were very vulnerable. You were being taught how to be a person by this environment, and you had no point of reference. Even if your family spent time with other families, everyone would have had their masks on at that point. Everyone would have been behaving in the way that they thought will look good. Whereas your family will have just let their hair down and express themselves however they do in private. So you have, usually, in our society, one point of view on what it is to be normal, what it is to behave properly, what is good and what is bad, and all the subtle lessons that you pick up in childhood. You didn't have anything to compare it to. That puts you in a very vulnerable position as an infant. You are expected to treat this entire situation as normal, no matter how crazy it actually is. You don't know that. You didn't know that. All you knew what was happening around you. All you knew was that your mother behaves like that, and your father behaves like that, and the other adults who are around behave in those ways. And if you respond in certain ways to them, or if you make certain noises, or later on if you say certain words or make certain choices and perform certain actions, they respond to you in certain ways. And that becomes conditioning, and you learn what is okay and what's not okay. But that was normal. That was the only example you had to work with. Now that might sound hugely obvious to you, but it's quite important to bear it in mind while you're beginning to analyse what happened to you as a kid. It's very easy for us to judge ourselves as having not done very well, or why is it we didn't notice how mad this whole situation was? But that was the situation you had, and that was your normal. And we respond very strongly to the idea of normal. We just want to fit in, we want to belong, we want to receive love, we want to be told that we're doing well, we don't want to be punished. So we want to fit in, we want to be included in the normal. So that is hugely important, and it's a really important thing to bear in mind while you're exploring what happened to you as a child. That was the only reality you knew. Okay, the second thing that's really important to bear in mind while you're thinking about what happened to you as a child is the huge power disparity that exists between you, the child, and the adults who are around, your caregivers, your parents. In that situation, we tend to assume that our parents know exactly what they're doing. They appear to be godlike. They appear to have all the answers. They know how to function. They can do all these things that we can't do. And when we ask them questions, they seem to have answers for us. They seem to have a really clear idea about how to do life, how to be a human. We grow up with them, watching them, we're being protected by them, we're deeply concerned about our safety and about how much they love us. So we look up to them as these powerful caregivers. And that means that there's this terrible power differential, and we tend to believe that they are right. Until a certain age, we think they are godlike and they know what they're doing and we don't. Therefore, if anything's going wrong, if we're being punished for having acted badly, or we aren't getting what we need, or some fundamental emotional or even physical need is not being met, we tend to assume that it's our fault. We tend to assume that they know what they're doing. Whatever this formula is, we have to fit into it. Even if looking back on it, a whole bunch of the behavior that was going on when you were a child is really dysfunctional. As a child, you didn't know that, no point of reference. So you look at them and you go, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not fitting in here. I'm not behaving properly. They clearly know exactly what they're doing. So if I got rewarded that time and then I got punished this time for doing exactly the same thing, that must be something wrong with me. I don't get this. I'm going to have to work harder on figuring this out. That belief, which is totally understandable in a young infant, has a huge effect on us later in life. If, for example, we did get inconsistent behavior, inconsistent responses to the way that we behaved, then you can end up with quite a lot of insecurity around certain people's behavior because you don't know what's going to lead to a good response and what's going to lead to a bad response. There's all sorts of other things as well that get laid down because we felt that we weren't fitting in properly. And it's one of the major ways that if childhood and a child mentality crops up in your adult life, it can cause massive problems because you can immediately be cast into this very vulnerable place where someone else must know what they're doing, or you're looking to work out how you can fit in. Whereas by that point, we're all adults and we're all trying to figure this stuff out, and nobody really knows the answers. But it's very easy to go into a state where we think that someone else must have the answers. It's also just really important, as I say, for analysing what happened to you as a child, to remember that you were just trying to fit in. You were trying to adapt whatever behaviour you needed to pick up in order to get the safety and the love and the positive responses that you needed. You would have adapted to that. And there will be things that you've probably identified now that are weird behaviours, weird beliefs, weird things that you have carried on from your childhood that were just you trying to fit in. Whatever you grew up in was normal, and whatever you grew up in, the adults knew better than you did, so you had to adapt to this situation. So that's the second really important thing to bear in mind when you're thinking about your childhood and trying to work out what happened to you and how that stuck with you and how it's kind of undermining or forming the basis of your adult decision making. Okay, the third thing, really important to bear in mind, we're moving now into how do you as an adult manage this legacy stuff that stuck with you, your childhood programming that just crops up when someone says certain words, when you're in certain situations, and suddenly you feel like a child again, or you start using the behavior and the solutions of a child. So a really important thing to bear in mind is that you can't go back to your childhood state. So what am I talking about and why is this so important? So when you're an infant, there is that huge power disparity I was talking about. So you are a highly vulnerable little squishy thing, and there are these godlike adults who know exactly what they're doing, and you are learning from them, and you're learning how to function from them, and you're having a response and a relationship with them. And in a number of ways, we can end up trying to recreate that relationship in our adult lives. Perhaps we're looking for someone or something which is going to make all of this make sense. We want to find a job where we can just show up and do what our boss tells us to, and then go home having been rewarded for our good behavior and punished for our bad behavior. And what we're doing is we're recreating an infantile state in the workplace. So that's one way in which this is important. We can recreate childhood states in our adult lives. In relationships, this happens. You know, you might have a partner or you might have friends who you look to for guidance. And that's fine. I mean, asking people for support or guidance or ideas is fine. But when we fall into a power dynamic where we are cast back into a place where we're very vulnerable and we have no idea, and then we cast the other person as the grown-up who has every idea and we should follow exactly what they say, that's a problem. That is taking our power away. It's robbing us of our potential for growth and development, and it's creating a quite toxic dynamic between you and another person. Another way that it's important to bear in mind that you can't go back is that we can't go back and erase what happened to us. We can't time travel back and go, well, okay, that adaptation that I picked up to my parents' toxic behavior or that traumatic event that happened to me as a child, I want to get rid of that. Unfortunately, that stuff stays with you forever. There are some therapies and there are some altered states of perception which apparently allow us to visit those moments and do some healing work directly on what happened to us then. I'm not going to talk about those particularly today. Some of them seem to be very backed up by evidence. Some of them seem to be a little bit more experimental and should be given a bit of suspicion. But certainly if you're going to engage with things like that, then just make sure you've done your research. And that aside, just make sure that as your baseline in your life, you're understanding that you can't go back and you can't erase what happened to you. For a lot of us, it is about integrating and learning how to function based on what happened to us. We can't just go back and erase those events, those memories, those adaptations, those behaviors that we picked up. That is now part of your history. It's part of the legacy of who you are. It doesn't have to be who you will always be, but it will probably always be there at the back of your mind. And during sudden shocks or big emotional moments, you might find yourself reaching back for responses and beliefs and strategies that simply don't make sense anymore. And you know this, and sometimes you can witness yourself doing it and go, why am I doing this again? I thought I'd left all this behind. And yet at certain peak moments in our lives, we do just tend to reach back for what feels really comfortable and safe, even if it was from decades ago in our lives. So that's another reason it's important to remember that you can't go back. And the final one is sometimes when we begin to dig into what happened to us as a child and the legacies that stay with us in adulthood, there can be a strong need to punish our parents. If you've never had this feeling, then that might feel shocking to you. But an awful lot of people do encounter this feeling on some level, like, you guys really messed me up. Or, why did you always do this that you knew? You must have known that was hurting me. Or, why did you push me in those directions? That's not where I wanted to go. Why did you rob me of those opportunities? All sorts of things we can end up being very angry with our parents about. Our parents did screw up. No parents are perfect, and in our culture, parents have almost no chance of being perfect. The best they can do is the best that they can do. They might read books, they might get consultations from experts, they might find out every piece of information they can. They might be engaging with their own personal growth work while they are parenting, and yet they will still make mistakes. So our parents made mistakes, and we will make mistakes with our children. So again, it's important to remember you can't go back. You can't go back into that situation where you were the vulnerable child and they were the adult with all the power, and then punish them for having screwed up, for having messed up part of your childhood. They are who they are now. And you are who you are now. You're a much more grown up, much more capable person. And they are now, decades later, no longer the same person they were when they did that thing to you, or they passed that thing on to you, or whatever it was that happened. There can be this really strong impulse to punish, alienate, lash out at, and yet it won't achieve anything. You won't gain any kind of relief by punishing them now for what happened to you then. And that can be a very, very hard thing to come to terms with. So for all those reasons, it's important to remember that you can't go back. And the fourth thing that I want to talk about today, again, this is an adulthood thing, this is how do we relate to all this stuff, is that you can't lose your inner child. You can't get rid of them, you can't delete them, you can't kill them, you can't just suddenly not have any of those impulses anymore. Partially, this is because of the way that our culture handles maturing and initiation between stages of our lives, and the fact that it just doesn't. So there was no sudden break between being a child and being an adult, as every other culture kind of had. Ours doesn't have anything like that. You just slowly do this morphing between, and so you end up with a lot more legacies of your early life than you would otherwise have. And there are lots of reasons you wouldn't want to get rid of this inner child. A lot of our sense of fun and play and wonder and excitement and adventure and discovering things for the first time, or revisiting things as if they're new, playing with ideas. A lot of this is informed by our childhood selves, by the way that we were when we were a little child. So you don't want to get rid of this stuff. And really, it's an important thing to understand that when we're talking about growing up, stepping into a fully adult self, we're not talking about getting rid of the child. And I think not understanding that can be a big reason why people don't get into this work. That sounds horrible. Like, you don't want to get rid of your precious memories and the fun and play that you have, and how sometimes you and your partner will just, be silly together. Or the sense of wonder you have when you discover something new and you get to just play with it for the first time. These are wonderful things. And I think some people think like adulthood feels heavy, and it feels like a demand and a responsibility, and what could possibly be good about it. But we don't try and get rid of the childhood stuff. What we're talking about is trying to get the best of both worlds. So it's not about getting rid of your child. That can be a misunderstanding that a lot of people make. Trying to be a grown-up A lot of people just go, I don't want to be a child anymore. I'm going to be a grown-up self, and I'm just going to be sensible and serious all of the time. And it's not about that. It's about having a good relationship with your inner child. There's a process, which I'll talk about more another time, called self-parenting. And it's basically really understanding what's you as an adult, what's you, your sort of inner child, your infantile self, and then having a great relationship between the two. The ideal is to walk through life hand in hand with your inner child, and they get to like point stuff out and go, wow, or get scared by stuff, or feel overwhelmed by stuff, or have fun and play and silliness. And then you're there with them as the parent, being the ideal parent that you needed when you were young. And you're there with them, you're holding their hand, you're reassuring them. When they freak out, let's say you're about to go on stage and do a presentation, scary for most people. I saw a statistic the other day that said that people in the UK find public speaking more frightening than the idea of dying. So you're about to go on stage and your inner child is freaking out. I can't do this, this is scary, they're going to look at me, they're going to laugh at me, all these infantile responses. But if you've done your work, if you've done your self-parenting and you can consciously step in there, give your inner child a hug, say, it's all right, I've got this. I will get us through this. And if they've seen you do it before, so they can look at you and trust that you do know what you're doing and you are going to handle this, then they calm down and they let go. And they go, okay, you've got this. And then you go on and you do your thing and you're not freaking out. And then you come back later and you play with them and you reassure them and you say, look, you see, I had it. I could do this. That's the amazing thing about adulting. So we're not looking to erase, get rid of, throw out our inner child and be a completely serious grown-up adult all the time. This isn't that work. This work is about happiness and fun and play. And it's about just putting the power in the right place. Your inner child does not have the skills and the capacities to be able to navigate your life. You do. You, adult you, does. Because even if you don't know the skills now, you have the ability to go and find them. You can Google search, you can pick up a book, you can go and consult an expert, you can learn skills, you can take control, you can be in a position of power and responsibility, and your inner child gets to just let go and have fun and play. That's where we're going with all this. So the fourth thing is, we're not trying to get rid of your inner child. We're trying to play with your inner child. We're trying to hold hands, make sure the child feels safe and loved and reassured at all times. And so you are free to be your fully empowered adult self, make good choices, build a good life, engage with the kind of joy that children can't access, and at the same time be able to play and have fun and be silly. So that's the fourth thing. So I hope that's been an interesting and useful introduction to this. Just a couple of things there to kind of stir the pot, give you some ideas, stimulate some thoughts and some feelings, maybe give you ideas about where you're going with this. I'm very happy to make a long series about adulting. I deal with this work all the time. I find it fascinating and interesting. And as I said earlier, many of us never get to what I would call the starting blocks in life. We are always struggling to even get to that place. There can come a point in our lives when we are free of all of the baggage, the cultural conditioning which has held us back, all the negative thinking or the toxic beliefs that have held us back our whole lives. There can come a point where that all just falls away and we step into our full adult selves, we've done the self-parenting work, we've got a good relationship with our inner child, and then it begins. Then the excitement and the adventure begins. And most people never even get that far. I have so many clients, whether they're in their 20s, their 40s, their 70s, and they are just doing this work now. So it's important. Like, to me, this is exciting, essential work that frees you up to be able to live an amazing life. So I'm very happy to talk about this at length, but it would be useful to know, what do you want to hear? Like, what should I talk about? What would be a useful thing for me to talk about adulting, about relationship with a child, about what happens to us as an infant and then how does that affect our adult lives, about resources. I've got a few books that I'm going to recommend. What would be helpful for you to hear from me? Or what would it be helpful for me to spiel about? So let me know, drop a comment below, or send me a message, or hop on social media and send me a message through that, or even go to my website and send me an email. I would love to hear from you. It would be really useful to know what would be helpful for this series. I hope you found today useful. Remember to give it a like. Remember to be subscribed to my channel, and I'll see you again next time. Take care.